The sun was just beginning to dip behind the distant hills, casting a warm golden hue over the manicured lawns of Oakwood Heights. Everything about the neighborhood exuded calm, a place where the humdrum of everyday life was punctuated by the chirping of birds, the occasional hum of a lawnmower, and the friendly waves exchanged by neighbors. For the past 2 years, this had been her sanctuary. Nestled in a cozy 2-story home at the end of a cul-de-sac, she had built her world around its peace. Here, she had cultivated friendships, planted a rose garden, and most importantly, found respite from the pressures of living in the shadow of her father, the mayor. But on that particular Saturday, as she poured herself a cup of coffee and settled on her favorite armchair by the window, the tranquility shattered. A letter slid through the mail slot, its heavy thud making her stomach tighten with instinctual unease. She had seen this kind of letter before, thick, official, bearing a return address she knew all too well, the Homeowners Association. She let out a breath, unhurried but with a faint edge of frustration. Not again. The HOA had been known for its strange, petty complaints, oversized shrubbery here, a misplaced lawn ornament there. But the timing of this letter felt different. She had never received a certified letter before, much less one stamped with such urgency. Her eyes narrowed as she tore it open. The contents were stark and impersonal, like a judicial summons. "Dear Ms. Thompson," the letter began, her heart sinking as she read the words. "We regret to inform you that your property is in violation of multiple HOA regulations. Failure to address these infractions within 14 days will result in legal action. Specific violations are enclosed." She flipped the page. The violations listed seemed absurd. A violation of landscaping codes, an improperly painted fence, a fence height dispute, which was perfectly within the legal limit. But what stopped her breath was the final line. Failure to comply may result in law enforcement involvement. Her pulse quickened. Law enforcement. Over a fence. What in the world was going on? Her phone buzzed suddenly, the noise slicing through the sudden tension in the air. It was a text from her neighbor, Karen, a friendly woman she'd known since moving in. "Did the HOA contact you too? They're on a rampage. They'd been taking photos of your place." Her stomach dropped. Taking photos of her property. That wasn't just an issue of landscaping anymore. The HOA was making an example of her. But why? Her mind raced through the possibilities. What had changed? She wasn't the type to provoke anyone. Her garden was neat, her lawn trimmed, and she always followed the neighborhood rules to the letter. Before she could process more, the doorbell rang, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps on her porch. She walked cautiously to the door, peering through the peephole. To her shock, standing on her doorstep was not one, but 2 HOA board members, their faces tight and stern. "Good afternoon, Miss Thompson," one of them said, his voice clipped, almost rehearsed. "We've come to take a few photographs of your property to document some ongoing violations. We trust you have no objections." Her pulse hammered in her ears. No objections. She had plenty. She was about to speak when she noticed a shadow flicker behind them. A police car, parked just across the street. A chilling realization washed over her. This wasn't about her property anymore. This was about sending a message. She stood there, her hand trembling slightly as she clutched the doorframe. Why now? Why her? And then, before she could utter a word, the board member's voice dropped a little lower, the words carrying an almost threatening undertone. "You're lucky your father's name is on the deed. For now." The door shut with a soft click, but the cold, gnawing sensation in her gut remained. Something much darker was at play. And this was just the beginning. The next few days were a blur of tense silence and mounting anxiety. Every time the front door creaked open, her heart skipped a beat. Each time she glanced at the Ring camera, she wondered, was someone watching? The first real sign that things were spiraling came the following morning when the mailman dropped off another envelope, this one marked with the same oppressive, official-looking HOA stamp. Her hands, still shaky from the last letter, hesitated before tearing it open. Inside, it was worse than she could have imagined. "Dear Miss Thompson," the letter began, its chilling formality cold as stone, "we have been informed that your property has been the subject of multiple complaints by other residents. Your fence has been noted as a safety hazard. Your garden encroaches on public space, and it is with regret that we inform you that your lawn maintenance has not met our community standards. We trust these violations will be corrected promptly to avoid further action. Failure to comply within 10 days will result in legal intervention." Her eyes darted over the letter as disbelief turned to fury. Safety hazard. The fence was fine. Public space encroachment. She was on her own property. Lawn maintenance. Her grass had never been better. The HOA wasn't just picking apart the smallest details. It was as though they were fabricating violations out of thin air, one after the other, in a pattern that felt deliberate. But what was their real game? Before she could begin to question further, her phone buzzed again. A text from Karen, her neighbor, came through. "They came to take photos of my yard today, too." One of the board members said they were doing a routine inspection for all properties in the area. "But they barely even looked at mine. Only your house. What's going on?" Her stomach churned as she read the words. Routine inspection. It was becoming more obvious by the day. This wasn't random. The HOA's escalating demands weren't just complaints. They were a weapon, and she was the target. A day later, the police returned, this time with a different officer. He was polite but firm, asking if she had any knowledge of recent disturbances on her property. Disturbances. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on her. She was being dragged deeper into something she couldn't quite grasp, and the more she tried to reach out for answers, the more tangled the web became. The officer handed her a report. 2 supposed incidents in the past week where suspicious activity had been reported near her home. Suspicious activity. The absurdity of it all made her feel like she was losing her mind. The report listed vague complaints, noisy conversations in the yard, unauthorized vehicles parked on the street. She hadn't even been home the day the complaints were lodged. The officer's eyes lingered on her, and for a brief moment, it felt like he was studying her, measuring her for something she wasn't yet aware of. "We're just following up," he said coolly, "but I'd advise you to take this seriously." The HOA's been insistent. As he walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just following protocol. He was involved. It was too much of a coincidence that every complaint, every escalation, pointed back to her. It wasn't just the HOA anymore. It was something larger. Someone was pulling the strings behind the scenes. Her thoughts were racing as she grabbed her phone, dialing her father's number with trembling fingers. The mayor. The man who was supposed to protect her from these kinds of things, from the corrupt systems that preyed on people. But the phone rang and rang, unanswered. She looked at her watch, noon. She knew where he'd be. Another meeting, another conference with city officials, another event. But she couldn't wait for him to come home. Not this time. She was done waiting. This was no longer just about petty HOA rules. It was war. And she would uncover the truth, no matter what it took, with or without her father's help. The knock on the door came like a punch to the gut. It was sharp, insistent, demanding her attention. Her heart skipped as she hesitated, standing in the hallway, staring at the front door. She had just started to piece things together, to make sense of the madness surrounding her, when it all came crashing down. There was no way she was ready for this. Not yet. She opened the door slowly, just enough to peer out, and was met with the stern face of Officer Daniels. His uniform was crisp, his badge glinting under the porch light. Standing behind him was another officer, a woman she didn't recognize, both with serious expressions that spoke volumes. "Miss Thompson," Officer Daniels asked, his tone colder than she expected. "We need to ask you a few questions about an ongoing investigation." The words ongoing investigation hit her like a freight train. What had they gotten her into now? "Yes," she replied, her voice betraying none of the panic rising in her chest. She had to remain calm. She had to. We've received reports of several disturbances at this address. Daniels continued, holding up a clipboard with what looked like official papers. Suspicious activity, illegal entry, and potential property damage. We're following up on complaints from a concerned neighbor. Her mind spun. Disturbances, illegal entry. This was absurd. Her house had been quiet as a tomb for the past few days. She hadn't noticed anything strange, other than the relentless harassment from the HOA. Her thoughts flickered back to the vague complaint the officer had referenced earlier. Unauthorized vehicles, noisy conversations. It was all fabricated. She could feel the walls closing in on her, and she couldn't understand why. "What kind of disturbances?" she asked, trying to keep her voice even, hiding the tightness in her throat. "We're not at liberty to discuss specifics." The second officer, Officer Lopes, interjected with a thin, almost mechanical smile. "But given your connection to the mayor's office, we need to be thorough. We've been instructed to ensure there are no ongoing issues with your property. You wouldn't want to be caught up in something you're not aware of, would you?" The implications hung in the air like a thick fog. The subtle threat in Officer Lopez's words was clear. She was being watched, and it wasn't just the HOA at play. Her father's name had brought this to the forefront. But now she was being dragged into something far more sinister than a garden violation. The officers weren't just asking about disturbances. They were insinuating she was somehow responsible for them. "I've done nothing wrong," she replied, her voice firmer this time. "And I don't know what these allegations are about, but I'm happy to cooperate. However, I don't appreciate the way this is being handled." Daniel's eyes hardened, as if her defiance was unexpected. He stepped forward slightly, his voice low. "We're just doing our job, Miss Thompson. We suggest you cooperate. You don't want things to escalate any further." He handed her a business card, more like a warning than a gesture of service, and turned to leave. Lopes followed without a word, leaving her standing there, breathless, unsure whether to slam the door or lock it and never open it again. The silence that followed their departure was deafening. What the hell was going on? She locked the door behind her, every inch of her skin tingling with the electric hum of fear. This wasn't just about a fence. It wasn't about garden rules or HOA codes anymore. She was being set up. But by who? And why? She knew she had to get to the bottom of it. Fast. But with each passing moment, it felt like the world was closing in around her. The police were involved. Her father's reputation was at risk. And somewhere in the darkness, someone was pulling the strings. There was no more time to sit back and wait for answers. She needed to act before things spiraled even further out of control. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, the air in the house felt suffocating. She stared at the business card Officer Daniels had handed her, her fingers running over the cold edges as if the paper might reveal some hidden truth. It was clear now. This wasn't just about her property. This was about her connection to the mayor, and someone was using that to their advantage. Her thoughts circled back to the letter from the HOA, the one that started all this chaos. The subtle threats, the escalating complaints. It wasn't just petty bureaucracy anymore. It was personal. But who would do this? Who had the motive to bring down not just her, but her father too? The answer, she realized with a shock, was right in front of her. It was the HOA. They had been the first to strike. But the more she thought about it, the more it didn't make sense. There was something off about the way they'd singled her out. They hadn't even bothered to address the other homes in the neighborhood with as much urgency. Why? She grabbed her laptop and began digging. The HOA's public records were easy enough to access, but it was the private ones she needed. She called in a favor from a friend who worked in local government, someone she trusted. They didn't waste any time. Within minutes, she was staring at a digital file of the HOA's internal memos. Her heart skipped as she found what she was looking for, a string of emails between board members, all discussing her, specifically her father's recent political moves. The emails were vague at first, but as she dug deeper, one email stood out. It was sent from one of the HOA's senior members, a woman named Linda Brooks, who had been a part of the community for years. She was more than just a board member. She was a pillar of the neighborhood's elite. The subject line was chilling. It's time for the mayor's daughter to learn her place. She clicked it open, reading through the contents, her pulse pounding. The email spoke in code, but the message was clear. Linda had a vendetta against her father. Years ago, during a highly publicized city council vote, Linda's campaign had been derailed by a scandal involving some of the mayor's opponents. She'd lost everything: her reputation, her influence, and the email made it obvious. She blamed the mayor for it. Her father had never mentioned Linda. He had never spoken about what had happened during that election, but it was clear now. This was the reason behind the HOA's sudden obsession with her. Linda had orchestrated this, weaponizing the HOA to punish her father through his daughter. Her anger flared, but underneath it was a cold, gnawing fear. She was just a pawn in a much larger game. The HOA wasn't just trying to get her arrested. They were trying to destroy her family's reputation. They were trying to send a message. As she read further, she found a list of names. Several other board members, all with their own grievances and motives, each one more personal than the last. It became clear this wasn't just an isolated effort. This was a calculated attack designed to break her and her father. A knock at the door broke her concentration. She jumped, the weight of what she had uncovered pressing heavily on her chest. She had to act fast. There was no time to waste. She crept to the door, glancing through the peephole. Two men stood there, dressed in black suits. They weren't police. They weren't HOA members either. Who are these people? She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. This was it. The next move in the game. But this time, she wouldn't be caught off guard. The doorbell rang again. She was running out of time. The darkness around her deepened, and the silence of the house felt suffocating. The stakes had just gotten higher, and she was determined to win. As the SUV remained parked across the street, her anxiety intensified. Her breath caught in her throat. She watched it through the curtains, every second stretching into eternity. Who was inside? Was Adler watching her from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike? Her mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. "Karen, what do you know about Adler?" she asked, her voice urgent. "Why is he after me?" Karen shook her head, her brow furrowed in fear. "I don't know everything, but I do know he's dangerous. He's not just some disgraced businessman anymore. He's built connections, real power, and I think he's using the HOA as a cover for something bigger. He's been moving quietly, but he's been planning something that involves your family. And now you're caught in the crossfire." The tension in the room thickened as the reality of the situation settled in. The police, the HOA, the mysterious complaints, all of it was part of a much darker puzzle. But the question that burned at the back of her mind remained. Why? Why was she the one Adler had chosen to target? "I need to talk to my father," she muttered, more to herself than to Karen. Her thoughts were racing as she glanced at the clock. It was almost time for him to return from his meeting. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. But when she reached for her phone to call them, her screen lit up with a notification. It was an alert from the local news station. Breaking. Mayor's office investigated for alleged corruption in real estate deals. Her stomach dropped. She opened the link, reading quickly. The article was vague but pointed, hinting at shady dealings from her father's past. There were no specifics, but the implication was clear. Her father's name was being dragged through the mud again. And this time, it felt like it wasn't just the press. The HOA, the police, they were all part of the plan to ruin him. "No," she whispered, a chill running down her spine. Was this why Adler had returned? To destroy her father, not just financially, but politically as well. And why involve her? Was she just a convenient target, or was there something more? The black SUV across the street suddenly pulled away, its tires screeching as it sped down the road. She stared at it, heart pounding, but before she could make sense of it, Karen's voice broke through her thoughts. "We need to go. Now." Without another word, Karen grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door. Confusion and adrenaline spiked within her, but she didn't resist. Something was happening, something she didn't fully understand, but she couldn't ignore it anymore. Outside, the evening sky had deepened into twilight, and the air felt thick with impending danger. Karen led her down the street, toward the alley that ran behind her house. The smell of damp earth and the sound of distant traffic filled the air, but there was a strange emptiness in the neighborhood now, a sense that something was off. As they turned the corner, Karen stopped abruptly. "This way," she whispered, pulling her into the narrow passage that led to a back entrance she'd never noticed before. They stopped in front of a door that looked old, worn, nothing special. But Karen's hands moved swiftly as she inserted a key into the lock. "We can't go back inside the house. It's too dangerous." "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Adler's people," Karen replied grimly. "They've been watching. They know where you are, and they won't stop until they get what they want." The door creaked open slowly, revealing a dimly lit staircase that led down into darkness. Fear clawed at her throat, but there was no turning back now. She stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind them, and the quiet darkness of the basement swallowed the sound. She stood frozen for a moment, eyes adjusting to the dim light. The air was thick with must and age, the walls lined with boxes and old furniture. There was a heaviness to the place that made her skin crawl. What was going on here? She glanced over at Karen, who seemed oddly calm, her eyes scanning the shadows like she was used to the secrecy. "We're safe for now," Karen whispered, lowering her voice as if even the walls might be listening. She walked over to a dusty desk in the corner of the room, pulling out a drawer. But not for long. Adler's people won't stop. She didn't understand. Karen had spoken as if she knew more than she was letting on, but now was the time for answers. Her pulse quickened as she approached. "What the hell is going on, Karen? Who is Adler really? What do you know about this?" Karen turned slowly, her face serious. "Adler is more than just a disgraced businessman. He's been pulling strings in this city for years. He's the one who's been behind the push to get your father out of office. And it's not just the mayor he's after. It's you." She stumbled back, the weight of Karen's words sinking in. "Me? Why would he target me?" "You're a symbol," Karen replied, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "You're your father's daughter. He thinks if he can break you, he can break him. It's all about power. Control. He's been making moves for months, using the HOA as a front, creating this perfect storm around you. The complaints, the police involvement, everything. It's all orchestrated. But why?" Her voice was thin with disbelief. "Why would he care so much about me?" "Because you're in the way," Karen answered, her gaze sharp. "Your father's rise, his influence, it threatens everything Adler's trying to build. This isn't just about political power. Adler's in too deep with the wrong people, and he's willing to go to any lengths to destroy your family." Her mind spun, the puzzle pieces clicking into place. The HOA, the fake disturbances, the police, even the press release. It wasn't just a random series of events. Adler was playing a masterful game, manipulating everyone around her. She had become a pawn in a war she never knew existed. "So, what now?" she asked, her voice trembling with fear and anger. "How do I stop this?" Karen took a deep breath, looking away for a moment before her eyes locked with hers. "We expose him. We find the evidence, the connections he's made, the people he's working with, and then we destroy his plan from the inside. But we have to be careful. He's got eyes everywhere." Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from the narrow stairwell. Her heart lurched, and she spun around to see a figure emerging from the shadows, a man in a dark suit, his face familiar. It was the same officer from earlier, Officer Lopes. His eyes locked onto hers, cold and calculating. You didn't think you'd be safe here, did you? Lopes's voice was smooth, almost taunting. You've made things complicated. Her blood ran cold. No, not him. Karen stepped between them, her expression steely. You're with Adler, aren't you? Lopes didn't answer immediately, but the small, dangerous smile that tugged at the corner of his lips said it all. You're not just playing with fire, Miss Thompson, he said softly. You're about to get burned. Her heart hammered in her chest as the realization hit. This wasn't just about her father. It was about to get personal. As he moved closer, she instinctively backed away, her mind racing. They were surrounded, trapped in a room with no escape, and Officer Lopes wasn't here to ask questions. He was here to silence them. But something inside her snapped. She wasn't going to go down without a fight. The air in the basement seemed to thicken as Officer Lopes stepped closer, his dark eyes never leaving hers. She could feel her pulse in her throat, her hands trembling at her sides, but she wasn't about to let fear paralyze her. Not now. Stay calm, Karen whispered urgently, positioning herself between the officer and the door. We don't have much time. Lopez's smirk deepened as he observed Karen's protective stance. You think you can stop this, Karen? It's over. You've crossed the wrong people. She took a step forward, voice steady despite the fear bubbling up inside her. You're part of it, aren't you? Part of Adler's plan. His response was a low chuckle, like he was enjoying the game. You have no idea what you're up against. I've been doing this for a long time. You're in way over your head. Her mind raced, but a sudden thought broke through the panic. She wasn't helpless here. She had the evidence. The emails Karen had helped her retrieve from the HOA's internal network, the connections to Adler, his threats. It was all laid out in front of her. She just needed to make sure the right people saw it. Without taking her eyes off Lopes, she backed toward the desk. The papers were still there, but the laptop was too far, too visible. If Lopes noticed it, it would be game over. The fight for her father's reputation, her freedom, it could all be lost in an instant. Why now? She asked, her voice quieter but laced with a sharp edge. Why go after me? What do you gain? Lopez's expression darkened, but he didn't answer immediately. Instead, he shifted his weight, his gaze darting to the door, then back to her. Because you're the last thing standing between Adler and everything he wants. You don't even realize it yet, do you? Her thoughts were a blur, the pieces falling into place just beyond her grasp. What does he mean? Your father's fall will be the start of something much bigger. Lopes continued, his voice low and almost pitying. It's not just politics anymore. It's about control over this city, over the people who think they're safe. Adler is just the beginning. He's got plans, and you, well, you're just collateral damage in the end. Her stomach churned. This wasn't about politics. It wasn't about a feud. It was about power, control over everything. And she was caught in the middle, an unwilling pawn in a dangerous game. But she couldn't back down now. If she did, her father's reputation would be destroyed, her life irrevocably shattered. I'm not afraid of you, she said, the words falling from her lips before she could stop them. The defiance was there, sharp and clear. And I won't let you win. Lopez's eyes narrowed. You really think you can stop this? The plan's already in motion. You're too late. But something about his demeanor changed. He wasn't as confident as before. She could see the shift, the unease creeping into his expression. Was he bluffing? Or had something gone wrong on Adler's end? Before she could press him further, a loud crash echoed through the basement. The ground shook, and the lights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. Lopes whipped around, momentarily distracted. The sound had come from upstairs. She wasn't sure what was happening, but her heart skipped in her chest. This was her chance. Without thinking, she grabbed the papers off the desk, shoving them into her bag and zipping it shut in one swift motion. She caught Karen's eye, a silent exchange passing between them. They didn't have time to waste. "Move," Karen hissed, pulling her toward the back of the basement. Lopes was distracted, but not for long. They had to get out. Now. They rushed to the back of the room, where a small window barely wide enough for a person to slip through was barely visible through the shadows. Karen pushed her through first, her hands shaking but determined. "What's happening?" she asked, as Karen squeezed through after her. "No time to explain," Karen replied, her voice urgent. "Just run." The cold air hit her face as she emerged into the alley behind the house. They were out, but they weren't safe yet, not by a long shot. A car was already idling at the end of the alley. Karen had a plan, but she wasn't saying anything more. As they sprinted toward the car, she glanced back at the darkened house. Her pulse hammered in her ears. This wasn't over. Adler's men were still out there, Lopes was still hunting her, and the web of corruption was only just beginning to unravel. But she wasn't going to wait for it to catch her. The car screeched to a halt just as the first sirens began to wail in the distance. The chaos from the house behind them was now catching up to them. Her heart raced, each beat thudding against her ribs as she leaned against the cold, metal frame of the car. The adrenaline that had kept her running was beginning to wear off, leaving her with a gnawing fear deep in her gut. They were out of the basement. They were out of the house. But the war had just begun. "We can't stop." Karen's voice was low but urgent as she slammed the car into gear, her eyes scanning the rearview mirror. "They'll be after us soon enough. We need to get to the rendezvous point before Adler's people find us." The streets blurred around them as Karen drove, her hands tight on the wheel. Her mind was still spinning from everything that had happened. The collision of truth and danger had collided so fast, it left no time to process. Why didn't she see it sooner? Adler's grip had been tightening for months. No, years, and she had been too blind to recognize the web closing in around her. The crash from upstairs wasn't an accident. It had been a distraction, a way to force her into the open. And Lopes, he hadn't been working alone. He was just one of many, an agent of something much larger. As they sped through the empty streets, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Her heart lurched. Was it the police? Did they find the evidence? She fumbled to answer it, the screen lighting up with an unknown number. "This is it," Karen muttered, her grip tightening on the wheel as she glanced at her. "Don't pick up." But it was too late. "Miss Thompson," a cold voice said through the speaker. "I hope you're ready for what's coming." Her throat went dry. It was Adler. She knew it instantly. The calm, unshakable tone of someone who had already won. He was in control. He was always in control. "Don't think you can run," Adler continued, his voice carrying a smug certainty. "The more you resist, the harder it will be for you. You're already out of options. You've seen too much, and you've exposed too much. Your father's influence is crumbling, and soon enough, so will your reputation. This is the end for you." The finality of his words hit her like a punch to the gut. She felt her resolve waver, but she couldn't let it show. She couldn't let him win. "What do you want, Adler?" she demanded, forcing her voice to sound steady. "To see you fall," he replied simply. "And if you don't make it easy on yourself, then I'll just have to make it harder." The line went dead, leaving her staring at the screen, her fingers frozen over the keypad. The weight of his words hung heavily in the air. They were playing for keeps, and he wasn't going to stop. "Karen," she said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts. "What now? What do we do?" Karen didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to. They both knew the truth now. "There's only one thing we can do," Karen said, her voice resolute. "We bring it all to light. We expose Adler for who he really is, and we take him down from the inside. But we need the right people. People who can't be bought, who won't be manipulated." She glanced at Karen, still grappling with the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. But Karen's expression was unwavering. "It's not just about stopping Adler. It's about making sure nothing like this ever happens again." Karen added. "You're not alone in this fight. I'm with you, and so are others. We'll burn this place down if we have to." They were heading for the rendezvous point, an underground network of people who had been tracking Adler's movements for months. It wasn't just about politics or power anymore. It was about survival. And taking down the man who had manipulated, controlled, and destroyed everything he touched. As they neared their destination, a sudden sense of clarity washed over her. She wasn't helpless. She wasn't alone. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning.